Welcome back to another episode of Musa Theories. This is going to be an interesting one. So today we are going to discuss on how Africa got colonized. How we're going to do this. First, I'm going to tell you a small prophecy that happened way back. This is called the Three Lion Prophecy. So back in Africa before colonization and before anyone discovered Africa, there used to be people who were good at prophecy. There were people who are good at prophecy. Others were rainmakers. Others were healers. So the healers were basically the doctors. Rainmakers were people like when it's time for drought, they will go pray to the gods and do whatever, and there will be rain, and then the farmers will be happy, start planting season. Then there were call them prophets, but they used to call them foreseers. These were the prophets. So in the whole of Africa, north, east, west, south, and central, there were different foreseers who gave out a prophecy. This is how the prophecy went by. They were like, there will be three lions that will come to Africa. The first lion will come to spy. The second lion will come for your culture. And the third lion will come for your wealth. That's the Three Lion Prophecy. My name is Moses and welcome to Musa Theories. Let's begin. So today's episode is how Africa got colonized. For most people, Africa got colonized by the British, the Portuguese, the French, the Belgians, basically depending where you will see. Most of East and South Africa is East, South, and part of North was colonized by the British. Most of West Africa was colonized by the French. Basically, the biggest shareholders of colonialism were the British and the French. The Germans were there like in Tanganyika, right now known as Tanzania. But after the World War, when the Germans were defeated in the war, the British took over. The Italians the same way. So a point to note, there are a few countries that were not colonized. So the first country which was not colonized was Ethiopia, and the other one was Liberia. I think so. Liberia, yeah. So Liberia was not colonized because it was, let's say, a setup land that was used to bring or to settle the freed slaves. Because after a while, slavery was stopped. And they were like, okay, fine, where are we going to put these other people who were sold, but we have to return them? So they returned them to Liberia. The reason why Ethiopia was not colonized was because they defeated the Italians in something which is called right now the Battle of Adwa or Adoa. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But basically, those were the two countries that were not colonized. So let us look at colonization. How did it begin? Like I told you, the three lion theory, they say the first lion will be the spy. So how does this prophecy relate to colonialism? I'll explain it right now. So the first lion was the spy. How was this relevant? So the spy were the explorers. So before the colonizers came and whoever was those colonizers like people like Vasco da Gama who were coming from all the way from Europe looking for a shorter route to India. Some people say, oh, they were looking for spices, which I don't buy it. There's no way you'll take a ship all the way from Europe, go around Africa, all the way to India in the name of spices just to make your curry goat. Nah, I'm not convinced. Tell me something else. But basically, they were basically the spies. They're the ones who went around Africa to look what's going on. Who are these kind of people? So basically, Vasco da Gama and some of the explorers who were there were just basically mapping the whole continent. Like, what's going on here? Who are these people? Because they had to go back and report to the kings in Europe, because by then most of Europe was under monarch rule. Like in England, there was like there was the kings there. There's the Tudor time. There was the Queen Elizabeth, all that stuff. In France, there was still under monarchy that time. The King Louis the 16th, King Louis the 14th, etc. Spain was also under the king. All of it was a whole monarchy, but these people were working under those monarchies. So the first lion was the spies who came to look and see what does this continent have to offer. Now, let's go to the second lion. The second lion was coming for your culture. And who was the second lion? The second lion was the. This is going to be a little bit controversial and also probably my favorite part. The second lion was the missionaries, the people who are coming to spread Christianity. This is interesting because when this is how everything adds up. The colonizers, the explorers came to look, how can we take over this continent? Now, the missionaries came with a strategy. We need to defeat these people. And how are they going to do this? Let us introduce our culture to them. And how did this help in colonization? When they came to Africa, when the missionaries came to Africa, they looked at these people, they're like, wow, one, there are so many. How do we reduce them? So they came with Christianity. I'm sure many Christians will be annoyed with this part, but these are the facts. They told the Africans, you have to adopt the Christian sense of lifestyle. Which is it? You have to marry one wife, one man, one woman, which is not the African culture then. That came with the missionaries. So they're like, this is how the Lord or Jesus Christ advises us to live. It was a bit of a hassle, but they managed to do it. They built some churches here and there. People started following them. But the after effect down the line is because now, let's say if Moses was living that time, I will have like 6 wives. But then when the missionaries came, they're like, you know what, you need one wife. So if I was to have like 15 kids, I'm having 3 kids. You see the math now. We have controlled the population. Second of all, as we all know, the Bible says if someone slaps your cheek, you have to turn the other cheek. So most Africans were the ones who were disagreeing with the missionary kind of lifestyle. They couldn't attack them because they had already transformed into Christianity and violence is not good. So most of them will not even fight. There's usually a joke that goes around Africa that people say we were given the Bible as we were praying. By the time we were saying amen, we had the Bible, they had the land. Depending on which country in Africa you come from, I don't know how relevant that joke is. Now, that's the second lion that came for the culture, because the missionary came and disorganized the whole African culture. Now, let's talk about the third lion, where we're going to put most of the focus on. Now came the colonizers. The colonizers came now to attack, get the wealth, get whatever they could get out of Africa. So I'll give an example of the British. So the British formed something called, they had there were companies which were involved in colonization. But before we go into colonization, we're going to talk about how they even decided to colonize Africa. So you have to look at something called the Berlin Conference, which was organized by Otto von Bismarck. So basically all European countries came with a map of Africa, and then they started mapping. They're like, okay, the British will take Nigeria, Ghana. French will take like Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Mali, Burkina Faso. Basically, it was like, how do we share this loot? And they had agreements, like no one would encroach on each other's land. But this was done in a strategic way. If you look at African countries, how the borders are, all the borders in Africa today, they were not drawn up by any African at all. This is all colonialism, total. Wherever you see, even the names, Kenya, Uganda, most of it, they were named by their masters, that's the colonizers. So they named countries. Some of the countries have already changed names. Like here's a point to note: like a country like Zambia and Zimbabwe had different names that time. It was Northern Rhodesia, which was Zambia, if I'm not wrong. Then Southern Rhodesia will be Zimbabwe. So if you look, they were named after, like, let's say, the CEO of the British company, who was by that time, why they call it Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia was because the person who was entitled by the monarchy to rule Africa, who was given the work, let's say like a governor, was a guy called Cecil Rhodes, who started a company in South Africa called De Beers, probably mostly dealing in mines. So basically, that's how they divided Africa. But if you look closely at the borders, the way it was divided is kind of different. They just didn't divide it because they wanted to divide it. They divide it in a way whereby if these people tried to unite, it will be a problem. That's why if you look at Africa, it's kind of divided. When you look at how the French colonized Africa, they have like one big chunk, like almost the whole of West Africa is colonized by the French, apart from Nigeria and Ghana, if I'm not wrong. But that was done intentionally so that the people of that side cannot unite. Second thing they used was language. Most countries that were colonized by the French, they adopted the French as their official language. As you can see, I can speak English not because I want to, but because my country, Kenya, was colonized by the British. So we all ended up speaking English. That's how the colonization worked. But how the borders were divided, they were very meticulous and calculative about it. They divided the countries, or they made Africa, they divided whereby there will be one similar community, then draw up a line in between them. Especially if you watch the previous Musa Theories episode, I gave an example of like Kenya and Uganda. I'll also add an example of Tanzania today. If you look at Tanzania, there are some similar tribes in Tanzania and there are some similar tribes in Kenya. For example, most people know the Maasai, the people who jump, they live among lions. They are a tourist attraction in East Africa, especially Kenya and Tanzania. So there are Tanzanians who are citizens there are Maasais who are citizens of Tanzania. Then there are Maasais who are citizens of Kenya. But this was only possible because the British divided the border in their land. So basically, they divided them. So there is no way these people will unite and attack the British. Hence, this is the divide and rule policy. That's how they used to colonize Africa. Divide them, then rule them. Make sure tribes become antagonistic with each other. Like I explained in the previous episode, there were so many civil wars in Africa. For example, I'll give an example of the Rwandan genocide that happened between the Hutu and the Tutsi. How this genocide happened is when the Belgians were ruling Rwanda, they were using the Tutsi to govern the country. But when colonialism was over, they left the power with the Hutu. And according to the Hutu, they were not happy how the Tutsi were treating them. So when the Belgians left, they were like, you know what? It's our time to revenge. And that's how they started fighting, leading to a genocide, a civil war between the Hutu and the Tutsi. A good movie recommendation, I will say, go watch 100 Days and Hotel Rwanda. It will give you a brief history about the civil war in Rwanda, which still has some. It has a big significance of African history. So all that was caused by, I will say, it's an aftermath of colonization. These are one people just because they were used differently by the colonial masters, they ended up being antagonistic uh, tribes. Then, if you look at a country like South Africa, Namibia, Angola, they have the people of the Khoikhoi and the San. Usually, they're mostly hunters and gatherers. For people who have a brief history of Africa or African languages, there is the click sound. These are the guys who normally speak the click sound. But they were all one tribe, one place. But because the British divided South Africa, Namibia, Angola was under the, is it the Portuguese? If I'm not wrong, Angola was under the Portuguese. So all of them were divided. So that's how Africa got colonized because we were basically divided. The French used another tactic. They didn't use divide and rule. They used assimilation. So what's assimilation? Assimilation is introducing the French culture. It's basically, they tell you if you wear suits, if you can speak French, you know what? We'll give you the opportunity to go and live and work in France. Of course, that was a very, how do I call it? Something nice for the Africans then. They're like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to get out of Africa and go to France. So basically, it was also part of the brain drain. But basically, that's how Africa got colonized. Basically, they divided the communities that were there. Another thing they used was indirect rule to colonize Africa. So, what is indirect rule? Indirect rule is whereby the British come to the country. I'll give a good example of Uganda. Uganda is a good example of how the British used indirect rule. So basically, what the British will do, they will give most of the managing of the country to the kings. So Uganda had like kingdoms. There was the Buganda kingdom. There is the Banyankole kingdom. There is the Basoga kingdom. There is the Teso kingdom. So basically, they will give the power to the kings to run the affairs of the people. But as much as he was the king, who had the final say? The British. So basically, the British used indirect rule and direct rule. Direct rule was whereby direct rule, I'll give an example of a good example of direct rule is Kenya. Kenya was ruled under direct rule. And why is this? Indirect rule was used by the British in a place whereby there were more collaborators. Collaborators were people who are following and they liked how the British ran things. They were like, yeah, the British are the boss. Direct rule was used whereby there were more resistors. Resistors were these tribes, they were like, no, this is our land. We don't want any British here. So if you look at direct rule was used in Kenya because of the Mau Mau. The Mau Mau was a freedom, was a Kikuyu-led freedom fighters. So basically, the Mau Mau means Mzungu aende Ulaya, Mwafrika apate uhuru. Basically, what it translates is the British should go back to Britain and the Africans should get back their land. Basically, that's what Mau Mau translates into. Another way the British just used how to colonize Africa was the gun. It was who had the most advanced weapons. So I'll give an example of Tanzania. Tanzania had this rebellion group called Maji Maji Rebellion. Maji Maji Rebellion was led by a guy called Kinjekitile Ngwale. He was basically a traditional healer. He went and told the people of his tribe, like, hey, since I'm a traditional healer, I will talk to the gods, do some incantations. I will make a special kind of water which I will pour on you that the German bullets will not work. So when they shoot, they won't work. So the people, since he's a traditional healer, like, okay, fine, we'll believe you. So that's how the Maji Maji rebellion means. So Maji in Swahili, if you translate it to English, means water, because he was using a special kind of water to make the bullets turn into water, leading to the name of Maji Maji rebellion, basically the water rebellion. To everyone, your guess is good as mine. What do you think? Did it work or no? To cut the long story short, these guys, magic or whatever gods he prayed to, I guess the gods did not answer. But the people believed him anyways. So they went to the British with their spears and their inferior weapons. Sorry, not the British, the Germans. When they went to attack the Germans, of course, the bullets worked. So many people died. So basically, one way Africa got colonized was through the gun, literally by force. You either follow what we are saying or we shoot you. That's it. And the British under Cecil Rhodes had this thing whereby they wanted to colonize Africa from south to north. If you look at the African map from south, if you look at South Africa, colonized by the British. When you go to Zambia, Zimbabwe, the British. When you go to Kenya, Uganda, colonized by the British. When you go up north, partly North and Southern Sudan, the British had a hand in it. Then Egypt under the British. So literally, the whole from south to north on the Horn of Africa. When I say the Horn of Africa, I mean that part of Somalia that literally looks like a rhino's horn. That's why they call it the Horn of Africa. They literally wanted to control all of that, of which there are some countries they were able to get, others they couldn't get. Another way the British used to colonize Africa, actually, this is the most recent one that was used. This is called the apartheid policy. Basically, the apartheid policy was used in South Africa under one of the presidents, F.W. de Klerk. How was this? So apartheid policy was to divide services between the Africans, the Europeans, and the Indians. So basically, it was a class system whereby you'll go to a restaurant, they will tell you this side is for only the whites, this side is only for the Africans. That was basically the apartheid policy. Like there were some services only for the Africans, there were some services only for the whites who were the colonizers by then. How this happened is they even segregated some places whereby the Africans could only live. These places, they used to call them the Bantustans. Something that really relates to Bantustans right now is like if you look at one of Africa's biggest slums, Soweto. Soweto during the apartheid policy times was a Bantustan whereby all the Africans usually just live. Also, the apartheid policy, how they used it was not to give the African children education, or they will give them minimal education, as little as they could give. So they didn't have the knowledge or the skills to do any kinds of jobs. So all the jobs were to anyone else apart from the Africans. So the Africans were literally kept poor. They did not have any at all, any kind of skills or any kind of way of trying to help themselves or even fight for their freedom, because they didn't know how to, because they don't have the education at all. That was the apartheid policy, which led to the rise of ANC, the African National Congress. Yeah, it's the African National Congress that was led by people like Nelson Mandela, who started fighting for their freedom. But basically, the point of the Berlin Conference was to divide all African countries so that it will be so hard, like literally so hard, up to now, for Africans to unite. That's how colonialism even affects us up to today. For example, the time when the African Union was being formed, someone like Kwame Nkrumah came with a proposal in the African Union to have Africa to just be one country. But due to the differences, like some African countries that were colonized by the French, they're like, oh, you guys only speak English. Why should we be one African country? Like, we can't speak the same language. That did not work because how effective colonialism was that you guys cannot unite because you have copied all the European ways, and which is different. These guys have copied the French kind of lifestyle. These guys have copied the British kind of lifestyle. These guys have copied the Portuguese kind of lifestyle. So coming together to unite is a problem. Another thing that colonialism really became so effective was religion. If you look at the map of Africa again, you'll realize most of the north is Islam, most of the south is Christian. So for you to be able to merge these two people, it's really, 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 really hard. Then another thing that African colonizers made sure we couldn't do was to form our own systems. If you look at the world today, there's so many systems. There's capitalism, socialism, communism. There's nothing for Africa. Like, and African countries, they only have those options. African countries are either capitalists, socialists, or communists, which is rare, but they either follow the East or the West. There's no kind of way. But I've given you all the problems, but now the main point of this episode today is like how Africa got colonized. I will also ask the question is, how do we get out of this trap? How do we get out from the trap of colonialism? Because in my own personal opinion, it's the one that's keeping us behind. Because even our politics is similar to our colonialists' kind of politics. Like, we have political parties, the British have political parties. Basically, it's one and the same thing. The only difference is this is Africa, the other one is Europe. So one thing, here are my solutions, and I'm sure people will disagree with this because it's going to be very controversial. One, get rid of the political systems we have. We have to start from scratch because whatever we are using is a colonial way of politics. Basically, it's a colonial way of leadership. We need to go back to the Ubuntu style of leadership. So what is Ubuntu? Ubuntu was a style of leadership that was in Africa before colonization. So basically, what is Ubuntu? Ubuntu is you are because I am, and I am because you are. If you are to translate it right now, I'll use a good Christian example is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Basically, that's basically Ubuntu. It actually came to be known with other different names. If you go to Tanzania, they had something called the Ujamaa. Ujamaa is a brainchild of Ubuntu. Ujamaa is togetherness. If you go to Tanzania, basically, they are the most language they use is Swahili because that was their uniting language. If you go to Kenya, Ujamaa was actually, before I forget, it was started by the first president of Tanzania, Julius Kabarage Nyerere. When you go to Kenya, there is the Harambee system, which was started by the late Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. Harambee basically means togetherness. It's also a brainchild of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and you are because I am. In South Africa, they had similar things like there was this uh, slogan during time when they're trying to fight for their independence. Uh, if I'm to pronounce it correctly, it is Umkhonto Wesizwe, literally the spear of the nation. Literally, if you were to translate that slogan, basically is it literally means all of us are the nation. Everyone has to participate in nation building. Basically, that's Ubuntu. So my first solution is Africa to go back to its originality, its authentic self of Ubuntu. That's why Africans, we are always welcoming to neighbors. The second solution is religion. Religion is actually a hindrance to Africa progressing. But remember, this is my opinion. I don't know what you think. Religion has become it's literally, to me, it's a problem because religion plays a very big part in politics in Africa. For example, according to your religion, it will determine how far you'll go in politics. For example, if you're a politician in a Christian dominated country, if you are of a different religion, the likelihood of you becoming a president is really hard. So you have to, part of it's a silent qualification. For you to become this, you have to be of a certain religion. You have to be praying to a certain God in a certain style. That way, religion has even shaped some of the policies in Africa. So for us to decolonize ourselves, we have to separate religion from politics. A good example of how you're not supposed to combine religion and politics. In the previous episodes, I mentioned the French Revolution. Part of the French Revolution happening was because of religion. Religion was forced onto the people. So when they were fighting to remove religion from everyday government business. And why do I say this? When you're leading a country, you're not leading it like you can use religion on some of the basic laws and principles of the country, yes, but it shouldn't be the core. What should be the core should be, how does this society relate? Because in a society, there's different religions. People believe different stuff. So for you to govern Africa properly, you should remove religion totally from politics. And I'm not saying religion is bad. All I'm saying, remove religion from politics, because all of us cannot be Christians. All of us cannot be Muslims. All of us cannot be Buddhists. All of us cannot follow the African traditional system. What's most important is, how do I relate with you? If you look at some of the African civil wars, some of them have literally been instigated by religion. If you look like a country like Chad, they're usually just fighting because this faction is of a certain religion and this faction is of another religion. Then my last and third solution is, what is making us Africa not to decolonize ourselves is our education system. For example, our education system is literally it's exam based. Like, you'll study for so many months, years, only to just write an exam. It's based on what you can remember, not what you understood. So here are my 3 solutions. You can add your solutions on the comments down below. The first one is Ubuntu. Let us go back to our ways, to the authentic African lifestyle of Ubuntu. You are because I am because you are. I'm only here because you are watching this, and I'll only make this because I know you guys will watch it. That's a basic example of Ubuntu. Second one is, remove religion from politics. Get it out. The third is education. Education, how we need to reconfigure our education to match our lifestyle, our society, basically everything, reconfigure everything. This wouldn't happen we wouldn't change it in one day, but there are steps we can make. And actually, the fourth solution, which is the last one, is the language. This is actually, to me, the most important one. If you look like other continents, if you go to Europe, the most languages used is French and English. Basically, everyone can understand each other. If you go to places like China, almost everyone can speak Mandarin, Cantonese, or which other one? I've forgotten the other one. But basically Mandarin and Cantonese. If you go to Australia, it's English. If you come here in North America, it's basically majority is English. If you go to South America, it's Latin. Africa, there's how many languages? There's so many. There is so many. As Africans, we don't have that uniting language. Whichever language we speak, everyone can know what we are saying. A good example is even me. I think I can speak English better than my local language, Luo. I can speak, my Swahili is better than my English, but my English is better than Luo, which is my local language, which really saddens me a lot. How can I speak better English than my mother tongue? That's really, coming to think of it, that's really actually a big problem. Really, really big problem. But in Africa, you'll meet people who can only speak English, but they cannot speak their mother tongue. So basically, as Africans, we don't have our own secrets. The Chinese, when they speak, you have no clue. I am sure they can speak English. I have never seen in any high-end those presidential meetings, I've never had someone like Putin, Xi Jinping, like those Eastern countries. I'm sure they can speak English, but they will stick to their own language. That's how you become superior. In Africa, we cannot become superior because we have no unifying language. And in me providing a solution, I will advocate for Swahili to be pushed as the unifying language for the whole of Africa. Why would I say that? Because Swahili, it's a mix of Arabic, Portuguese, and the Bantu languages. I'll give you a few examples. Like in Swahili, we say mananasi. Mananasi basically in English is a pineapple. I think in Spanish or Portuguese, it's called ananas. So basically, Swahili cuts across so many languages whereby we can understand each other. Why again I say Swahili, if you look at South, Central, and East, we have this word called Ntu. Why we call it Bantu? It's Bantu because it's the Ntu people, the Bantu people. So basically in East Africa, when we are to refer to a person, we'll say Mtu. If you go to South Africa, they will say Ntu. So basically, if you look at even the languages themselves, if you go to Malawi, if you go to Zimbabwe, like tribes like the Shona, the Ndebele, if you go to South Africa, the Xhosa, the Zulu, there's too much similarities which some of their words can be used in, they understand some bits of Swahili. So that brings me to the end of this episode of Musa Theories on how Africa got colonized and some of the solutions we can use to remove ourselves from that sphere of colonization. My name is Moses, and thank you for watching Musa Theories. That's it for today.